The grand ballroom of the Oriental Hotel in Victoria Island was a sea of white lace, shimmering sequins, and the heavy scent of oud. It was the 10th anniversary of Apex Logistics, but to the elite crowd gathered, it was a coronation. Tade sat at the head table, his hand resting over Nneka's. She looked breathtaking in a custom-made ruby gown, her skin glowing under the crystal chandeliers. To the world, they were the golden couple of Lagos. "You look tired, my king," Nneka whispered, her voice like silk. She reached for a small silver pill box and handed him a white tablet. "Your heart medication. Dr. Chuka said you shouldn't skip a dose, especially with the stress of tonight." Tade smiled, swallowing the pill with a sip of water. "I'm fine, Nneka. Just a bit of vertigo. Probably just the excitement." He stood up, ignoring the slight tremor in his legs, and walked toward the podium. The room fell into a respectful silence. 10 years ago, I had nothing but a dream and a diagnosis that should have ended me," Tade began, his voice echoing through the hall. "Leukemia doesn't care about your bank balance. When the doctors told me I needed a bone marrow match or I'd be dead in months, the world went dark. But one woman stepped into that light. She didn't just give me her love, she gave me her marrow. She gave me my life." He turned to Nneka, his eyes glistening. "Nneka, you are the reason Apex Logistics exists. And tonight, as we prepare to take this company global, I want to ensure that what is mine is truly yours." Zainab, Tade's CFO, stood at the edge of the stage, her face an unreadable mask of granite. She held a leather-bound folder. Inside was the Global Asset Reassignment Deed, a document that would transfer 100% of Tade's shares in the billion Naira empire to Nneka. Tade picked up the gold pen. With a steady hand, he signed his name. The crowd erupted. Nneka rushed onto the stage, sobbing into his chest, her face buried in his neck. "I love you, Tade," she whimpered. "I'll protect this legacy forever." The static in the silence. An hour later, the vertigo hit Tade like a physical blow. He excused himself to their private VIP suite upstairs to lie down while the party roared below. The suite was dim, cooled to a crisp 18 degrees Celsius. He dropped his phone on the nightstand and collapsed onto the bed. His phone buzzed, a notification from the smart home app. He frowned. The app occasionally glitched, syncing his phone to the smart speaker in their Ikoyi mansion if the geofencing failed. He was about to swipe it closed when he heard a sharp, familiar laugh through the phone speaker. Did he sign it? It was Dr. Chuka's voice. Deep, arrogant, and definitely not at the gala. "Every single kobo," Nneka's voice followed. The sobbing angel from the stage was gone. Her tone was cold, sharp, and dripping with venom. "He actually cried, Chuka. He thanked me for the bone marrow. If he only knew that donor Kelechi is probably rotting in a slum somewhere while I took the credit." Tade's heart hammered against his ribs, but his limbs felt heavy, as if they were turning to lead. "The fool is so blinded by gratitude, he can't even feel the arsenic and paralytics we've been feeding him." Chuka chuckled. "How is the dosage?" He looked a bit shaky on stage. "He's upstairs resting right now," Nneka replied. Tade heard the sound of a drink being poured. "Give it another 2 weeks. Once the transfer clears the board of directors, we'll increase the dose." A massive stroke. Tragic. The grieving widow inherits a billion Naira empire, and the brilliant doctor stays by her side to console her. "To us," Chuka said. The sound of clinking glasses echoed through the phone. Tade tried to sit up, but his muscles refused to obey. The heart medication he had swallowed on stage was working, not to heal him, but to lock him inside his own body. Then, the door to the suite clicked open, a shaft of light from the hallway hit the floor. Tade managed to slide his phone under the pillow just as Nneka stepped in. She didn't look like a grieving wife or a savior. She looked like a predator. "Tade," she called out softly, her voice returning to that sweet, deceptive hum. "Are you awake, my love? It's time for your nightcap." She walked toward the bed, holding a glass of amber liquid. Tade watched her through half-closed eyes, his mind screaming, "I gave her everything." he thought, the darkness closing in. And tonight, she's coming for the rest. The shadow of Nneka loomed over the bed, stretching long and jagged against the silk wallpaper. She held the glass of amber liquid, honey lemon tea, she called it, with a steady, practiced hand. Tade, she whispered again, leaning closer. The floral scent of her perfume, usually so comforting, now smelled like a funeral wreath. Tade's mind was a frantic storm, but his body was a leaden prison. The paralytic from the stage was peaking. He couldn't jump up, he couldn't even shout. If he took this drink, he knew he wouldn't wake up to see the sunrise over the Lagos lagoon. Move, damn you. Move. As she reached out to lift his head, Tade summoned every ounce of willpower. He didn't try to sit up, he focused entirely on his right arm. Just as the glass touched his lips, his hand spasmed. With a clumsy, violent jerk, his arm flailed out. The glass flew from Nneka's hand, shattering against the mahogany nightstand. The sticky, poisoned liquid drenched the carpet and splattered across her ruby gown. Oh. Nneka recoiled, a hiss escaping her perfectly painted lips. For a split second, the mask slipped. Her eyes flashed with a murderous irritation that no loving wife should possess. Tade. Look at what you've done. Sorry, Tade croaked, his voice thick and slurred. He let his head loll to the side, feigning a deeper disorientation. Dizzy, the lights, Nneka took a deep breath, smoothing her features back into a look of concerned pity. It's okay, my king. Your nerves are just shot. I'll go get a cloth to clean this up. She turned toward the bathroom, her heels clicking sharply. The moment she disappeared, Tade reached under the pillow. His fingers fumbled with the phone, desperately trying to hit the record button on the live feed. He needed more than just a memory. He needed a weapon. The shadow at the door, a sharp, rhythmic knock startled them both. Mr. Tade? It's Zainab. The door opened before Nneka could protest. Zainab stepped in, her iPad clutched to her chest like armor. She didn't look at the galagoers outside, her eyes went straight to the shattered glass on the floor, then to Tade's pale, sweating face. What is it, Zainab? Nneka snapped, clutching a damp towel. Can't you see my husband is unwell? The board of directors is refusing to sign off on the asset transfer without a secondary biometric verification, Zainab said, her voice as cold and flat as a winter morning in London. They are downstairs now. They say the billion Naira shift is too large for a standard signature. Nneka's face tightened. Now. In the middle of our anniversary, money doesn't have an anniversary, Mrs. Tade, Zainab replied. She walked to the bedside, stepping right through the puddle of poisoned tea. She looked Tade directly in the eye. In that look, Tade saw it. Zainab didn't just see a sick man, she saw a crime scene. She noticed the way his pupils were dilated. She noticed the slight blue tint to his fingernails. He's in no condition to go downstairs, Nneka said, moving to block Zainab's view. He doesn't have to, Zainab said, holding up the iPad. I brought the mobile scanner. But I need 10 minutes alone with the CEO to calibrate the secure link. Company policy, Nneka. Not even a wife can be present during the encryption setup. Nneka looked ready to argue, but the mention of the transfer, her ultimate prize, stilled her tongue. She glanced at Tade, then at the broken glass. Fine, Nneka said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. 10 minutes. I'll go change my dress. Chuka is waiting for me downstairs anyway. The moment the door clicked shut, Zainab didn't pull out a scanner. She pulled a small, pressurized vial from her blazer pocket and pressed it against Tade's neck. Hiss, Tade felt a sharp sting, followed by a rush of cold clarity. Within seconds, the heavy fog in his limbs began to lift. Adrenaline and a broad-spectrum neuroblocker, Zainab whispered, her eyes darting to the door. I've been testing your water carafes at the office for weeks, Tade. I knew someone was messing with your chemistry, but I didn't know who. Tade gripped her wrist, his strength returning in a sudden, painful surge. Zainab, the bone marrow, the donor, I know, she interrupted, leaning in close. I found the payment trail 3 days ago. Nneka didn't give you anything. She paid a man named Kelechi 5 million Naira to stay silent and disappear to a farm in Delta State. She used your recovery to buy your soul. Tade let out a jagged, broken breath. The betrayal was a physical weight in his chest. I gave her the empire tonight. Zainab, I signed the papers. Zainab's lips thinned into the ghost of a smile. You signed the intent to transfer, Tade. But you didn't sign the execution. She tapped her iPad. I've already moved the primary holding accounts into a litigation freeze. As of 5 minutes ago, Apex Logistics is technically under audit. Nneka owns the shares, but she can't spend a single kobo without my thumbprint. Tade looked at his loyal CFO, the woman he had always considered a robot of efficiency. She had been his silent guardian while he was busy loving a viper. What do we do? Tade asked, his voice now low and lethal. We play the game, Zainab said, standing up as footsteps approached the door. Let her think the poison is working. Let her think she's won. We need her to lead us to Dr. Chuka's supplier. We don't just want a divorce, Tade. Tade looked at the door as Nneka's shadow reappeared. No, Tade whispered, his eyes turning to cold flint. We want an execution. The morning sun over Ikoyi was blinding, reflecting off the white marble of the mansion's courtyard. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Tade lay in the master suite, his body positioned exactly as Nneka had left him, limp, head tilted slightly, eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to bolt upright and wrap his hands around the throats of the two people laughing in the breakfast nook downstairs. But he remained still. He was a billionaire CEO, but today, his most important job was playing a corpse. The door creaked open. How is our patient? Dr. Chuka's voice was light, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the man he was slowly murdering. He didn't move all night, Nneka replied. Tade heard the clink of a silver spoon against porcelain. The spasm he had at the hotel was his last surge of strength. He's barely cognizant now. They stepped into the room. Tade felt Chuka's cold fingers press against his neck, checking his pulse. Tade slowed his breathing, a trick Zainab had taught him years ago during a corporate kidnapping seminar. Pulse is erratic. Perfect, Chuka murmured. The arsenic is doing its work on the heart, and the neurotoxin has successfully dampened his motor functions. In 3 days, his lungs will simply forget how to expand. It will look like a textbook case of post-transplant organ rejection leading to respiratory failure. 3 days, Nneka mused. Tade could hear the smile in her voice. Just enough time for the press to prepare the obituaries. I want a state funeral, Chuka. I want to look absolutely devastated in black lace. As soon as they left for the office to handle business, the door opened again. This time, there was no perfume, only the faint, sharp scent of antiseptic and espresso. Zainab didn't waste time with pleasantries. She strode to the bed and helped Tade sit up. They're gone, she said. She pulled a thermal flask from her bag. Drink this. It's a concentrated electrolyte blend with a mild stimulant. You've been sweating out the toxins all night. Tade drank greedily, the fire returning to his eyes. The board meeting is at noon. Nneka thinks she's going there to be crowned. What did you find on Kelechi? Zainab opened her iPad, showing a grainy photo of a man in his late 40s, his face etched with exhaustion, standing in a cassava farm. File, donor_09B, name, Kelechi Okafor, status, missing/relocated, last known address, Asaba. Delta State, note, bank records show a monthly stipend of 200,000 Naira from an offshore account linked to Nneka's maiden name. She's been paying him hush money for years, Zainab said. But look at this. She zoomed in on Kelechi's left arm in the photo. There was a distinct, deep surgical scar. That's the mark of a bone marrow harvest. He didn't just give you a sample, Tade. He nearly died for you. Nneka intercepted him at the hospital before you woke up. She told him you were a powerful man who didn't want low-life blood associated with your name. She threatened his family to keep him away. Tade's grip tightened on the flask until the plastic groaned. I was a fool. I built an empire on a foundation of lies. You built an empire on your own hard work, Zainab corrected him firmly. She just stole the credit for the spark. Now, we use her greed against her, the bait and the trap. Zainab laid out a series of documents on the duvet. They looked identical to the ones Tade had signed at the gala, but the fine print had been altered by a team of high-priced lawyers Zainab had flown in overnight from London. These are the execution papers, Zainab explained. Nneka will bring these to you today for a final confirmation signature before the board. To her. They look like the final transfer of Apex Logistics. In reality, they are debt assumption papers for a defunct subsidiary in Panama that owes the World Bank billions. And the confession? Tade asked, hidden in the sub-clauses. Zainab nodded. By signing, she acknowledges that all previous medical claims, including the transplant, were fraudulently represented by the beneficiary. If she signs this, she doesn't just lose the company, she admits to the scam. Tade looked toward the door. He could hear a car pulling into the driveway. Nneka was back early. She's coming, Tade whispered, falling back onto the pillows. Remember, Zainab hissed as she moved toward the closet to hide. You are the ghost now, Tade. Let her see exactly what she wants to see. The door burst open. Nneka walked in, her face flushed with excitement, holding a gold leaf folder. Tade, darling, she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. The board is waiting on Zoom. I just need you to put your mark on one last little thing. For our future, remember. She leaned over him, the gold pen poised in her hand like a dagger. Tade looked at her, his eyes unfocused, and saw the woman who had spent 5 years watching him die while calling him my king. He reached for the pen, his hand shaking with a fake tremor that masked a very real rage. Will Tade sign the papers that trap Nneka, or will Dr. Chuka realize the paralysis is a sham before the trap is sprung? Nneka leaned so close that Tade could see the tiny, cold spark of triumph in her pupils. She smelled of expensive champagne and victory. To her, the man in the bed was no longer a husband, he was a dying obstacle between her and a billion-naira lifestyle. Just here, my king, she whispered, guiding his limp hand toward the bottom of the document. The board is waiting. They need to see that you're still with us before they finalize the transition. Tade let his fingers twitch. He allowed the gold pen to wobble, leaving a shaky, jagged scrawl across the parchment. It looked exactly like the signature of a man whose nervous system was collapsing. There. Nneka exhaled, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She snatched the folder away before the ink was even dry. Thank you, Tade. You've done so much for me. Truly. She stood up, her posture shifting instantly. The doting wife vanished. She didn't check his pulse, she didn't offer him water. She walked over to the full-length mirror, smoothing her hair and checking her lipstick. Chuka, she called out, her voice ringing with a new, sharp authority. It's done. Tell the driver to pull around. We're going to the Apex headquarters. Dr. Chuka stepped into the room, adjusting his silk tie. He glanced at Tade, then at the folder in Nneka's hand. Did he give you any trouble? Chuka asked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Tade's vacant expression. None, Nneka said, tucking the documents into her designer briefcase. He's barely in there anymore. He just stared at me like a lost dog. Chuka walked to the bedside. He pulled a small penlight from his pocket. Let me just check his pupil response one last time. If he's transitioning into the final stage of paralysis, I need to adjust the final heart failure dose. We can't have him dying at the board meeting. It needs to happen tonight. In his sleep, Tade's heart hammered against his ribs. Don't blink. Don't react. As the bright light hit his eyes, Tade forced his gaze to remain fixed on a spot on the ceiling. He felt every instinct screaming to flinch, but he held the void. Midriasis is setting in, Chuka muttered, clicking the light off. He's almost gone. By tonight, the respiratory muscles will fail. Let's go, Nneka. We have a kingdom to claim. The door slammed shut, and the sound of the lock turning echoed like a gunshot. The counterstrike. The moment the car engine roared to life in the driveway, the closet door slid open. Zainab stepped out, her face tight with a mixture of fury and focus. She held a small recorder in her hand. She had caught every word of their final dose conversation. They're gone, she said, helping Tade sit up. Tade didn't wait. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the adrenaline from the encounter washing away the last of the paralytic's haze. He stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow that looked nothing like a dying man. She signed it, Zainab, Tade said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She thought she was signing for my life, but she just signed her own death warrant. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes, Zainab said, handing him a clean, black suit she had hidden in the closet. I've already alerted the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. They are positioned in the lobby of the Apex building. But Tade, we need one more thing, Kelechi, Tade said, nodding. He's on a private flight right now, Zainab confirmed. He'll land in Ikeja in 20 minutes. He's tired of running, Tade. He wants Nneka to pay for what she did to his family just as much as you do. Tade buttoned his shirt, his movements precise and lethal. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the same mirror Nneka had used to celebrate his death moments ago. She thinks I'm a ghost, Tade whispered. Tonight, I'm going to haunt her. At the Apex Logistics headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. The board of directors sat around the massive glass table, their faces grim. Nneka sat at the head, the gold leaf folder displayed prominently in front of her. Dar. Chuka stood behind her like a dark sentinel. As you can see, Nneka said, her voice echoing with faux grief, my husband's health has taken a tragic turn. In his final moments of clarity, he insisted I take the reins to ensure the stability of the company he loves so much, and the verification, one of the directors asked, leaning forward. Zainab mentioned an audit was underway. Zainab is overzealous, Nneka dismissed with a wave of her hand. The documents are right here. Signed and sealed, she opened the folder to reveal the signature. But as the directors leaned in, the doors at the back of the boardroom swung open with a violent crash. The room went silent. Nneka's heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, looking healthy, powerful, and absolutely furious, was Tade. And standing right beside him, holding a medical file from 10 years ago, was a man the world had never seen, Kelechi Okafor. Tade walked slowly toward the head of the table, his eyes locked on his wife's pale, trembling face. Is there a problem, Nneka? Tade asked, his voice smooth as ice. I heard you were telling everyone I was in my final moments. As you can see, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Will Nneka try to bluff her way out, or will the EFCC move in before she can utter another lie? The air in the boardroom turned to ice. Nneka's glass of water slipped from her hand, shattering against the glass table, a poetic echo of the poisoned tea from the night before. Her mouth worked silently, like a fish gasping for air, while Dr. Chuka took an involuntary step toward the emergency exit. Tade? Nneka finally choked out, her voice a thin, ragged wire. You're standing. It's a miracle. Dr. Chuka, look. The treatment worked. Chuka tried to find his voice, his professional mask crumbling into a sweaty mess of panic. Yes. Exceptional, the neuroregeneration was faster than anticipated. Stop lying, Chuka, Tade said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. He walked to the head of the table, his presence commanding and absolute. He didn't sit. He looked down at the gold leaf folder Nneka was still clutching. And you, Nneka. You can stop the miracle talk. The only miracle here is that I didn't die in that bed while you and your lover were toasting to my grave. The board of directors looked from the dying man to the vibrantly healthy CEO in total shock. Tade gestured to the man beside him. This is Kelechi Okafor, Tade announced. The man who actually spent 3 weeks in a hospital bed 10 years ago so that I could live. The man Nneka paid to disappear so she could wrap herself in a lie of sacrificial love. Kelechi stepped forward. His eyes fixed on Nneka with a quiet, simmering dignity. I didn't want your money, Nneka. But you told me Tade hated me. You told me my poor blood was an insult to him. You stole my chance to see the man I saved grow into who he is today. Nneka's face went from pale to a ghostly gray. She looked at the board, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. He's a liar. He's an actor Tade hired. I have the medical records. Chuka, tell them, the medical records you forged. Zainab asked, stepping forward with her iPad. She tapped a command, and the massive projector screen behind Tade flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a clear, high-definition audio-visual recording from the smart home hub. He actually cried, Chuka, if he only knew that donor, Kelechi is probably rotting in a slum somewhere while I took the credit. Nneka's own voice echoed through the boardroom, cold and mocking. The directors gasped. One of them actually stood up in disgust. Tade, please, Nneka sobbed, falling to her knees. The ruby dress she had worn to celebrate her victory now looked like a bloodstain on the floor. I did it for us. I was afraid you wouldn't love me if you knew I wasn't the match. I just wanted to be your hero, you wanted to be a billionaire. Tade corrected her, his voice devoid of emotion. And you got your wish. You wanted the empire. You signed for it 10 minutes ago. Nneka looked up, a flicker of confused hope in her eyes. The signature, it's valid. I still own the shares. Oh, you own them, Zainab said, a predatory smile touching her lips. But you didn't read the sub-clauses in that folder. You didn't sign for Apex Logistics. You signed for Apex Global Panama, a shell company Tade and I set up months ago to contain our bad debts and failed investments. Zainab flipped a page on the screen. The company you now 100% own is currently under investigation for 12 billion Naira in unpaid international tax liens. By signing that document, you personally assumed all legal and financial liability. You aren't a billionaire, Nneka. You are the most indebted woman in West Africa. The heavy oak doors opened one last time. 4 men in dark suits with EFCC badges stepped into the room. Nneka, Tade and Dr. Chuka Apara, the lead agent asked. Chuka tried to bolt, but 2 agents intercepted him, slamming him against the glass partition. Nneka didn't even try to run. She just sat on the floor, staring at the shaky signature she had forced Tade to write, the signature that had just tied a noose around her life. Wait! Nneka screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut. Tade! You can't do this. I'm your wife. You gave me your word. Tade leaned down, his face inches from hers. For the first time, she saw the true, deadly secret he had discovered. It wasn't just her affair, it was his own capacity for cold, calculated justice. I gave you my empire, Nneka, Tade whispered. Just like I promised. I just didn't tell you it was burning to the ground. He stood up and turned to Zainab. Clear the room. I have a company to rebuild. And Zainab, yes, sir, find Kelechi a permanent position as head of Foundation Logistics. It's time we started paying back the real debts. Tade walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Lagos skyline. Behind him, the screams of the woman he once loved faded as she was dragged down the hallway. The golden couple was dead. But for the first time in 10 years, Tade felt like he was truly alive. 6 months later, the Lagos sun was just as fierce, but the air in the Apex Logistics boardroom felt different. The tension that had once hung like a thick fog was gone, replaced by the humming efficiency of a company that finally knew its own truth. Tade stood at the window, not looking at the skyline this time, but at a framed photograph on his desk. It wasn't a picture of a gala or a ruby dress. It was a shot of a new logistics hub in Delta State. With Kelechi Okafor standing proudly in front of a fleet of trucks, shaking hands with the local community leaders, he didn't need to turn around to know it was Zainab. Her footsteps were as precise as her spreadsheets. She placed a final report on his desk. Nneka's appeal was denied this morning, Zainab said, her voice devoid of any pity. The international tax liens from that Panama shell company were airtight. Between the fraud, the attempted murder, and the debt, she'll be in Kirikiri for the next 25 years. Dr. Chuka is looking at 30. Given his medical license was found to be a forgery from a back-alley school in Eastern Europe, Tade turned, leaning against the mahogany desk. And the empire? How is that empty shell doing, empty? Zainab allowed a rare, sharp smile to touch her lips. We've recovered 110% of the lost assets. The market loves a survivor, Tade. Our stock is higher now than it was the night you gave it all away. People don't just invest in logistics anymore, they invest in the man who outsmarted a viper. I had a meeting with Kelechi yesterday, Tade said softly. He tried to return the shares I gave him in the new foundation. He said he didn't save me for money, he didn't, Zainab agreed. But you're not giving him money. You're giving his children the education Nneka tried to steal from them. That's not a payment, Tade. That's justice, Tade looked at Zainab. Throughout the entire ordeal, the poisoning, the betrayal, the corporate warfare, she had been the only one who didn't ask for a piece of the crown. She had worked 20-hour days to build the trap that saved his life, all while he was too blinded by gratitude to even notice her. Zainab, Tade started, his voice dropping an octave. Why did you do it? You knew about the poisoning weeks before I did. You could have let the transfer happen, watched the company fail, and been headhunted by a dozen rivals. Why stay? Zainab didn't blush. She didn't look away. She adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady, because a billion Naira empire is just a pile of paper if the man at the top doesn't have a soul, she said simply. I didn't do it for the company, Tade. I did it because you were the only CEO in this city who remembered my father's name when he was just a security guard at your first warehouse. Loyalty isn't a transaction. It's a foundation. Tade walked over to the safe behind his desk. He dialed the code and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. It was his journal from 10 years ago, from the days in the hospital when he was drifting in and out of consciousness. He flipped to a page dated the night of his surgery. I found this while we were moving Nneka's things out of the house, Tade said. He pointed to a small, faint smudge of blue ink at the corner of the page. It wasn't a signature. It was a tiny, hand-drawn symbol of a shield. Zainab froze. Her hand instinctively went to her own wrist, where a small, identical tattoo was hidden under her watch strap. Tade looked at her, the realization hitting him like a thunderbolt. It wasn't just Kelechi, was it? He gave the marrow. But someone stayed in the room. Someone held my hand when the fevers hit 104 degrees. Someone sang those old songs to keep my heart beating. Nneka had stolen the credit for the marrow. But she had also stolen the credit for the presents. Zainab pulled her sleeve down quickly, the granite mask returning to her face. The past is an audited account, Tade. It's closed. What matters is the future. Tade took a step toward her, the billionaire CEO finally seeing the true, saving grace, that had been standing in front of him for a decade. The secret wasn't that my wife was a killer, Tade whispered. The secret was that my hero never left my side. He didn't offer her an empire this time. He didn't offer her a ruby dress or a gala. He simply held out his hand. Let's go to work, Zainab. We have a lot of good to do. Zainab looked at his hand, then at the man who was finally, truly awake. She took it. Yes, Mr. Tade, she said, her voice finally softening. Let's go to work.